Hello, I'm Helen Del Judas, the curator of exhibits and collections at the Miller Art Museum in Sturgeon Bay, Wisconsin. And this is the 5th edition of the Studio Door. Today I'm going to sit down for a conversation with artist Leslie Iwai, whose exhibition Winter, Spring, and Eltergarden is on exhibit at the Miller Art Museum until December 26th. Come on down and take a look at it. So Leslie, welcome.
Oh, thank you. It's so nice to be here.
We are so excited about this exhibit, and we've had such a great response from the community already since it opened just 1 week ago. Yeah, thank you for being here and spending some time with me.
Oh, I'm so excited. It's been a fun process putting the show together, and working with you as a curator has been just really delightful. So
Thank you.
I'm glad that we could do this.
That's what it's all about. So I want to start, here we are in the gallery, and you have to come and see and experience, because this exhibit actually really transforms the Miller space. And that's one of the things I appreciate about it the most. It engages the entire museum, not just this particular room. And you're an installation artist, so this is an installation exhibit.
Yeah.
So I want to start there. I want to talk a little bit about, ask you to tell me about being an installation artist, how you approach your thoughts and your inspirations with the aim of installation works.
That is a really good question. I remember when I first discovered the word installation. I was in graduate school and architecture school, and I was thinking a lot about, I'd love to do word research. And so I kind of started to look into it, and I thought of the word stall, which was like maybe where animals were held, or horses. And I thought, things are held still in these places, but they really want to move. So I feel like there's the idea of a room that holds something that would like to move, but you're holding it still for a moment. It's like an installation. It's the idea that something has an active life that's being held for a moment in a particular architectural space. Now, maybe it's an outdoor space, but that still has architecture. Landscapes have architecture to them through trees or rolling hills. But, so when I think about installation, I really think about that idea of holding a life still for a moment. And I know you have a special love for still life.
I do.
Which is really fun that this kind of came together. We've had a lot of wonderful conversations building this show together.
And hopefully we're going to pass some of those on to you.
Exactly.
That's really interesting, though. I love that idea that the word stall, you began there to kind of think about what a stall actually is and how it contains a life or a story. And of course, this exhibit plays out very much, it has a lot in common with the still life, right? Which is a mechanism of storytelling and painting.
Wow.
And not only that, starting with tulips and animals, which are subject matter for still lifes quite often. That's fascinating.
It's funny because when we first started talking and you brought this up, I was blown away. Like the thought of how you put that together kind of just felt like it meshed with how I think about what I do. But honestly, often I think of still life as a painting or something two-dimensional. But then when we were talking, it started to feel like it's sort of moving back. It's kind of crossing boundaries.
Crossing boundaries, that's a good way to put it. Now, installation work is not, it's a groundbreaking thing. It's a new territory for the Miller Art Museum.
Wow.
So this is really, really exciting. So behind us, people can look at the stall, right?
Oh,
the
yeah.
hutch.
Oh, right.
Now, hutch was the very first piece in this exhibit, in this creation of this installation.
Yeah. It's kind of funny. Actually, I'm going to back up for a minute because my story as an artist has been kind of moving from sort of more of a monotone color palette to colorful. But that has to do with also I have one of my things that you might see if you look at my website or something. It's like you have the carrot versus the stick. And so I started thinking a lot of my work in the first maybe 10 years felt a little more like a stick, like a little more like being driven, like looking down. And I thought, I want to create something that helps me look up, that is like a sweet surprise or something to kind of keep me going rather than feel like I'm driven. And so I started making this idea of carrots. So it kind of started with the carrots, but that was sort of before Hutch even got into my mind. And then when I also had been doing some birds, and I'm sure we'll show a picture of the birds that I've been designing. And I designed those back in 2007 was my first design, and I kind of let it go because I really wanted to they were very difficult to make, frankly. And so I thought, I don't know if I could even do it in animal shapes. And then it was just the desire to make the rabbit based on the carrot.
Right.
And I thought, well, I maybe I could approach that shape. And so I really felt like a lot of healing in terms of my hands and being able to make the rabbits. And then and I had an opportunity to make a piece for a really fun little shop in Middleton. And she invited me, do you want to put something together? I was like, oh, this is opportunity,
Yeah.
And so I started thinking, this is what I want to do. And so, but her little shop had a certain wall size and a really large wall. And so I kind of making an installation for her spot and then kind of making it with the rabbits. It sort of just kind of organically flowed. But I think with my bent towards kind of architectural shapes that kind of, I thought, I have to make it have its own space that fits into her space.
Right.
And that was sort of the launch for more discussions with you for this show.
Right. So this was the first piece that I saw from you when we started discussing the exhibit, which I was like, yes, let's go that direction.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is, but I want to see more of
I
it.
love that.
And we started talking about tulips and carrots and the garden and all of these different topics, the birds, dusk to dawn, piece that's just to the left of me.
Yeah.
And the installation sort of grew.
Yes.
So I want to just head back to installation for just 1 second and talk about, this path that you took from starting with this concept about, how the carrots and the rabbits just started to fit together with you. And then you had this other inspiration that seemed to play into these objects that you were looking to make. Tell me a little bit about how what that inspiration is and how that played into the development of these works.
So as Helen, as you and I were speaking, we were talking about that, and I also do. I'm a teaching artist as well in the Madison area, and I've also been doing teaching artist work for many years. And as I was speaking before, my palette had been a little monochrome, and I feel like I've learned a lot from students and the joy of color, right? The joy of color, and I had often been kind of scared of color, like I don't know if I can handle color, or my mentality was not there yet in terms of my own joy and my who I am and what I make. And one of my students was a man who was about 80 when he discovered that he liked to make art. And the art that he liked to make was tulips. He'd always draw them. And I thought, I get him to do anything else? Nope. And he would maybe do some collages, but I really loved that he was, just kind of blooming, in this art. And you could see his life and his talents kind of growing, as
and drawing these tulips. So he was a man with cognitive difficulties.
Yes.
And he had lived sort of a shut down life for several years in this facility that he was in.
Oh, with his family. And then they got connected with social services and then got connected with classes, and it was really cool.
And so one of the things that I really loved when you first told me this story about this gentleman was the fact that, the ability to draw these tulips, and tulips is just what he happened to want to draw and be inspired by, right? But the ability to engage in that way actually changed his life in a lot of ways, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and so then there was a day when he had passed away, and he had been in the class that I was teaching, and I felt like I need to bring some tulips just to have to remember him and to draw. And that day I think it was in April, and it snowed, and I took a photo of my bouquet of tulips I brought to class in the snow, and it kind of dawned on me that it was like he had experienced his spring in the winter of his life. And then, as I've been reflecting on age and kind of the transition of youth to age, and I see people kind of blooming in later years, right? I think, or sometimes we feel like they are camouflage, right, by age. Maybe you don't see it, but if you look a little closer, you can start to see the color and the things that are maybe hidden. And so I had made a tulip about in 2007 that I really loved and had a totally different feel than the ones here. But I thought, oh, I could just make some more tulips. And then when we were talking, it was like, this is the opportunity. And I thought of him, and I had been thinking of those tulips since he started drawing them, you know. And then I have people in my life that are aging, my mom and, you know, different friends of mine, and thinking, you know, how does childhood wonder and beauty kind of start to resurface? And so that's kind of the concept behind this, the tulips.
Well, and I think one of the things that people think about aging, when we think about aging, is that, you know, there's this point where you're going to be in retirement and you're going to be able to, you know, you will have set yourself up to, like, you know, for the golden years, to take up your hobbies and travel and spend time with family more, and sort of let all those responsibilities of life go. At least that's what people who are aiming towards retirement are dreaming about and fantasizing about that time period of their life being. And some people have the misfortune of health issues, whether it be at retirement or later, right? And here, what I thought was so fascinating about Clemens is he had this sort of renaissance, you know, at a point when his life was really almost at the end, when he was at the worst condition possibly that he had been in his life, right? And yet here was this, you know, this sort of bulb of beauty that, you know, not to be too poetic, but this bulb of beauty that bloomed for him.
It was wonderful, and he had friends, and you could just see him taking a little more artistic risks, which I think was kind of linked to that blossoming. And I see that with lots of people.
Right, you identified that also in your mother and in people close to you and your memories of your father.
Yeah, there's lots of this, you know, I think the camouflage of things, you know, is part of, you know, how we often see people. We see, you know, we start to kind of we see everyone kind of blending together. But if you get to know someone or you see something coming to the surface, that's a lot of that life that's hidden below. So I think I work a lot in layers. Some of I might be closer to 2D works. Sort of there's some in the show, there's the glass kind of installation and some of the layers of paper that I like to wear. I like the idea of you don't always know what's inside. There's many layers to a person or a space or a concept.
And some things you'll never know about.
Right.
The secret carrots is one word that's just to the right of you.
Yeah.
That's a piece that contains a secret. You have these sewn carrots that are hanging on the wall, and they're delightful to look at.
Yeah.
And, you know, if people take the time to read the card, they find out that there is something hidden inside of it. But as the viewer, you don't get to find out what's inside of it. It's just not part of what you're allowed in the piece.
Exactly.
And that's just part of the nature of people, isn't it?
Exactly.
There's some parts that you're just not allowed to know. You just never get to do that.
Right. Yeah.
I want to talk about how these tulips a little bit and how serendipitous and what a great opportunity it was, not only for us, the Miller Art Museum, but for you as well with this piece, Tulips for Clemens. The way it sits in our space is really just incredible. Yeah. Right?
Oh, yeah.
So it sits in the center of the room. The Miller Art Museum has removed its traditional furnishings to make way for this. And you can see it from above. It really activates our mezzanine.
Oh, yeah.
And you go up and you can experience it from above. And of course, I decided to curate an exhibit on the Ruth Morton mezzanine of botanicals and paintings and portraits of birds from our permanent collection, including one from our former director, Bonnie Hartman.
Oh, nice.
So we're very proud to have that. But it was sort of an extended garden. And in that way, I feel like you offered the Miller the opportunity to engage the entire museum in the story that you had to tell downstairs.
Oh yeah. I mean, one of my favorite moments is there's a lavender bird with a magenta lining, and all the linings of the birds, a lot of them are from the inside of the tulips, kind of to bring that harmony and that brightness. But right above on the mezzanine, there's a pansy, like a large pansy, like a lavender pansy, and it was just that serendipitous moment where you look there and you look up, and those colors just pull your eye, and it's just one of those bright, wonderful moments for me visually.
Right.
That
and the yellows are more closer to the greens and rich blues, and it just plays.
And that wasn't something that we had scripted out.
No.
And it's just those gifts that happen when you are kind of in sync and you're working together, and then it all falls into place.
Well, it's part of the organic nature of ideas, don't you think? I mean, I've always said with installation, because I've worked in very, very large museums and very small museums, and you have to have a plan, right? And you have to make sure you measure once, you measure twice, everything is down, to precision in creating a museum exhibit.
Yeah.
But then there's this serendipity of the idea, this organic part of it. And I feel like for you and I working together on this exhibit, there was really a lot of that, where we were taking the idea and just putting the puzzle pieces, plugging them in together.
Oh, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. That's one of the fun parts of kind of figuring out where things went. And, I really appreciated this floor being so beautiful to lay those down. I have a lot of people asking me, are the tulips standing up? And then a lot of people's minds are like, they're standing up. How is she going to do that? And in my mind, they're always laying down. Like,
right.
I just, but I love the sense of, being able to use the floor in a way that was new, and the kind of how kind of the whole museum changed and sort of opened up to embrace this different sized work. I mean, it was just kind of wonderful. And I remember when we were laying out the tulips, in my mind, it was straight. It was like hutch and tulips, and everything has to be a certain way. And then,
And then I came in.
Yeah, Helen comes in and she's like,
let's just give it a little kick over there.
And I get very, if you ask friends or family, I can get really stuck. Even as a human, I just think, oh, it has to be this way or that way. I think along the years of working, you start to trust people that you have a relationship with and trust their expertise. And when you said that, I was like, oh, I can give that thing in my brain up because I see it differently. And I feel like those things happened a lot. How we were able to kind of give and take, and
right.
and the museum and the structure of the museum is very generous with this work here. I'm grateful.
We're very grateful, and I'm very excited for the community to be able to see this exhibit. We're keeping it up until after Christmas, so I think it's an incredibly uplifting. There's something very hopeful about it. I mean, in some ways, you're tackling a pretty deep topic. You're talking about the end of life. You're talking about the loss of, sort of reality in a way at the end of life, right? With dementia. You spoke of a woman that you knew who had dementia and who tried to remain her adult self for her family. And yet she delighted in things like books that she loved when she was a child. And so, and that focus of childhood wonderment in the garden.
Yeah.
Peter Rabbit, the chasing, the carrots, the dirt, the lost mitten. All these things come to my mind. The lost button, Frog's Button. All these things, those childhood stories when I see these. Now, you chose vinyl for these. These are vinyl bunnies, vinyl tulips. In Dusk to Dawn, there's vinyl. I see them as what do they call them? Starlings.
Starlings,
right? I see them as starlings.
I think they're starlings.
I think they're starlings. They're swooping.
Or swallows, starlings. Starlings, I like that. Those are night birds. They kind of move around and they're eating.
They swoop. They stay in line with each other. This has a very, representing the horizon or the ground above the garden. The tulips laying on the ground. This ground orientation of the rabbits as well. But why vinyl? Of all the materials in the world, because vinyl's not easy.
No, it's not easy. But it's kind of funny. I think, so reeling backwards to, I think it was 2007, I was living in Omaha, and they had a thing of, do something with our logo, and 20 artists got picked, and I was making a giant O, and my idea was sofa, small s, big O, F-A. And I thought sofa would be like the idea of resting, but also flying. So I made my first attempt at this bird was like a 3 foot long, maybe longer than maybe 5 foot. I don't remember how big it was. But I thought, so I got connected with it. This might be an outdoor thing, or I have to put a cover on it. So vinyl felt very washable and durable. And so I kind of got into it there. I did this crazy upholstered O and indoor, outdoor. And I really I just started to fall in love with the colors and this idea that you can clean it. A lot of materials I've worked with are difficult to clean, or some are forgiving. Vinyl is forgiving in some ways, but if you poke a hole in it, not like woven,
it's there forever.
It's there forever. So mistakes show up a little bit in vinyl. So I have to get, my skills keep getting better. But I don't know if anyone in the audience knows, but when you're working and you don't work with it for a while, you have to rebuild your skills. So I feel like my skills are definitely primed for working with vinyl now. And I really enjoy it. I like the brightness. I like the ability to clean work. And I'm thinking about the idea of the Eiltergarten. My friends who speak German would say, is she pronouncing that right? I kind of thought of that as the connection with kindergarten. In like the kinder and the Alter, like the younger and the older. This idea of keeping things clean, wiping them down, like making sure there's a lot of care involved in keeping something that other kids and other people can handle. So I feel like vinyl is very handleable. In the world of where we're at with trying to keep things clean, it's actually very resilient.
In some ways, it's a textile of the future.
It is, and I and it's funny with the I kind of source from some different vinyl companies, and for the white vinyl, I looked probably through 20 or more samples and worked really hard to find the right sample, like the right durability, the right thickness, and then the tulips, you'll see it's a matte finish, which I think someone said it looked kind of velvety. So that sort of is another springboard. I don't know. I feel like I have a really great sewing machine, and that was back in 2007.
Tools matter.
Tools matter, and
tools matter.
When I have a certain tool that I've invested in, I tend to use that more than other tools. If I had maybe a welding system, maybe you'd see a lot more metal art from me.
Exactly.
But I also
it makes or breaks your capacity to make something based on what tools you have at your fingertips.
Yeah, and I love
you don't have the right tools, it's not going to turn out right. You may find and discover something interesting, but your tools are so vital to being able to accomplish what you want, and especially with something like vinyl.
I know.
And you've taken this vinyl and you've embroidered it into the petals of the tulip. I encourage all the visitors to really look at it. I mean, these tulips are haute couture.
Oh.
I mean, you have taken and done things to this vinyl that Jean-Paul Gaultier would be jealous of, with the strappings, the details. I mean, they really, as a person who studied fashion, I wanted to be a fashion designer for my first thing when I was a teenager, right? And I went to fashion school for a while, and really, I can see the design and the architecture of fashion, right? Because garment making is as a form of architecture.
Yes,
right?
Completely.
And you have an education in architecture, actually.
I have my master's in architecture, and love this idea of the structure. And it's kind of funny, like when you're saying that, all of a sudden I think these thoughts, you just keep sewing into the thoughts of installation. So it's kind of funny because, and there's a little video, I think I have a fast track video of almost basically clothing the metal structure.
Right, dressing it with
the tulips. It's almost like getting them ready, like the internal bones are the steel, but then dressing it. So it's almost like the structure, the clothing is now the installation around the structure.
And these tulips have all the drama of a fashion model on a set, with makeup and luxury. I mean, there's something incredibly high fashion about them too.
And I love
which has nothing to do with your sort of inspirational topic, but that's one of the benefits of art, isn't it? That it can take you other places that it didn't necessarily intend to, and that doesn't detract, it just adds.
Yeah, and I, I think there's some other pieces I've made. I've often made clothing for myself for an exhibit if I'm doing an interactive performance, installation. I've been actively working and creating sort of a visual event. So I've made my garments for that. And I did a piece, I think 2 years ago for Urbana, which was basically, look at my website, there's 7 garments and they're long and they have long trains. And I think, I kind of tend towards garment design too.
You have there are several works, even your works from Sierra Leone about children gravitated towards, and I do want to touch on that a little bit later. I want to talk about that topic being so different than what you're presenting here, but you do tend to gravitate, I think, at times to the garment, that there is something about that.
Well, I want to touch on just a quick note because when I first started sewing, I was in 4-H. I think it was in third or fourth grade, and I made a skirt and I made a bag, and I fell in love with that. And our grandma was a seamstress, and our dad did a lot of sewing, and so it's kind of something I saw a lot. And I went from walking down the aisle at the 4-H fair to now having tulips.
Massive 20-foot tulips.
Yeah, exactly.
Haute couture tulips.
Haute couture tulips. Who would know?
And, carrots, secret bags.
Like tiny little things too. Yeah, like a purse.
Yeah.
It's a purse for the tulip. Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit about in the rear gallery of the museum, behind the Winter Spring, we chose to display some of, works from other parts of your life. And going back to the idea, we'll go to the Sierra Leone and the interfacing drawings in a moment, but going back to the idea of installation, in your career, some of your works have really been ephemeral, right? They've been created for the installation, and then after the installation or the exhibit period, poof, they're gone. And so one of the ways that you maintain those works is to photograph them.
Yeah.
And so we have on display a series called the Unearthed Collection. Tell us a little bit about the Unearthed Collection and what you're thinking was there.
So part of it is that, a lot of times, like you said, there's a lot of ephemerality where things disappear. And how I like to get to know my work is through photographs. And, we're all taking photographs right now, but a lot of times, like a lot of the works will never be around. I can't re-put them somewhere else. I mean, if they go somewhere else, it'll be new. And
you draw your works as well.
I do. I like to draw them.
I think that's really interesting, and I think that's a really interesting thing for artists to consider, that once you make a work, especially if you make a 3D work, to spend some time studying what you did through drawing and photography is a really interesting practice.
It's a way to get to know. No, I don't know. I think it's a great practice. It's a way for me to get to know my piece. I feel like the pieces are outside of me. I've made them, but they are still a bit of a stranger to me. So it's like, how do I get to know a friend? I spend time with them. How do I, I didn't make that friend, but I feel like they're separate from me in a way. Right. So there's always that mystery between making and beholding. Like the making versus the beholding are two different things. Absolutely. So I like to behold the things I've made because they still bring me a lot of wonder and joy. I mean, I get a lot of joy in just looking at the work and thinking, oh, what are you? I wonder what your name would be.
I mean, I'm a painter, and I know that in my studio, when I'm really concentrated on what I'm painting, sometimes once I put the brush down in the evening, I will literally sit there and stare at it and read my own painting for almost as much time as I spent painting it. Because it's informing me, it's telling me what to do next in some really, unconscious sort of a way, or maybe consciously. Right. But I think a lot of artists have that practice of examining their own work to understand what they did and what they didn't do and what they need to do. But you do it as a way of actually getting to know your work as sort of a relationship for the future.
Yeah, it is. And so the photographs in the back gallery are kind of like photos of my friends. Photos.
They're portraits.
Portraits or some kind of portraits. It's like they're very personal and it's maybe a way for the viewer to see how I would see something. Right. What I see when I look at my work
through your lens.
Through my lens.
It's also many times the only place that work will continue to exist.
Yeah. Yes. I mean, some things are just, like an Andy Goldsworthy, right? Like he does, like those works are only for him, really often, maybe a friend or two. Right. So all the work, even the parts and pieces from my work that are in storage, they are like perfectly, encased in some fine, airtight vacuum. Age and things happen to pieces. So none of those things will ever be the way they were. And I think that's how I guess I think about, our relationships. There's things and that light box with layered glass. I thought, there's ways that we try to preserve memories. And there's still deterioration of those memories. Right. And sometimes if you open the book that you press the memories and you're like, oh, if I open it, then it's going to bring air into it, and I want to look at it, but every time I look at it, it's like deteriorates more in a way. So it's like those layers are ways of maybe if I can look, but I don't have to open.
So you're referring to the light box, which is in the back, that accompanies the photographs for the Unearthed Collection. And I think this is like one of those ideas that I'm like, darn it, why didn't I ever think of that? I mean, it's just so, it's just so pure and romantic to me. The idea that you replicated, so you have this light box that hangs on the wall with these beautiful, curious glass. They're almost like, you know, jars in the science room. They've got that sort of a feel with, you know, curiosities of the natural world. There's something very Darwin about it. But in full color. Darwin in full color. What your idea was is that you took the dictionary that you press, which is a common practice for people, to press leaves and flowers and things inside of a large dark book. Yeah. Right? And inside of that large dark book, they dry, they lose their color, they become brittle over time, right? And so, and plus, they're contained in this sort of darkness. I really love that idea of thinking about how the condition of those natural elements inside of that book. Yeah. And so you decided to illuminate them and make them transparent, the dictionary itself, so that you could see the beauty of these objects contained. So these glass sheets sort of. I know. Brilliant. I mean, I already have thoughts of like, I'd like to examine. I did one a long time ago where I had a word that was one letter per piece of glass kind of floating in and out. So I mean, it'd be fun to do a series with words. Yeah. So, but I think, you know, words are very alive and they're very full. You know, that's one of my favorite things with investigating words. So I'd have to really. Which words? What are these? I know. So it's and then do the things come together. I don't know. I feel like each of the things I've shown in the back gallery and different places feel like they all could be developed even more. I mean, there's always more, right? Absolutely. More. Well, I think any one of the basically 3 topics that you have in the back room, in the back gallery, could develop into a show of its own. You know, and some of them have come from shows of their own. Right. So it's kind of like they're sort of, but there's always more like that. You know, that world could keep growing. That world garden. I want to keep finding that garden. And which season does it grow? Even in more cold ones. So I want to talk a little bit about the interfacings and the miniature sketchbooks. Oh yeah. So tell us this story, and it's a little bit of a tragic story. There's a little bit of darkness to it, but I think it really speaks to who you are as a caretaker. Oh. You know, and your relationship, how you relate to people, and what it is that you as a person, and then again as an artist, really have to offer in terms of conversation to the world. Well, so in 2005, I went with an organization to near like Freetown, Sierra Leone, and if you don't know about what happened there, it's good to look it up. There was a civil war, kind of I'm not an expert, but there was mass terrorism and kind of just horrible things happening to vigilante violence, just really horrible. And I came after that had subsided, working with kids and living just with people, and also like learning from people and just being in the community with some other women and that were maybe from some from the US, and we just were kind of trying to, it's called serving Jesus amongst the poorest of the poor. But I came there after I had done some larger projects, and a lot of that dealt with grief, and I came and I wasn't quite prepared for the secondary trauma that you might see in people who had experienced such trauma. And I brought my camera. I have a Hasselblad that I really love, and I took some photos. But I started to feel like that felt like a barrier, like a camera became a barrier between people, like a lack of connection. Like it felt like for me, I didn't feel good using my camera. I think I used it a little bit here and there, but I wanted to develop another way to get to know people. Well, one of the problems when you go into a war zone like that, when you have people who are, at the whim of conflict, I mean, they just have no power to defend themselves, because these are the people who you were working with, right? Who really children. They didn't have a gun. They didn't have a way to defend themselves, right? So one of the problems with a camera is we are our relationship as the public to photographs of those situations is through journalism. Yeah. Right. That's what we know about it, and there's something very far removed and documentative and creating a narrative, right? And so I think I can see why the camera didn't work.
It didn't feel good. I mean, I took like a Polaroid with me to get photos to people. So I found these little tiny sketchbooks. I mean, they had all these little stands set up to sell office supplies, and then there was like different food, and so there's like an office supply guy, and he had a little booth, and he had these little notebooks, and I just started buying the notebook, the little pack of notebooks, about this big.
Which he stapled together himself.
Yeah,
they're hand cut paper stapled together.
Yeah, or maybe he had a chopper or something. I don't know. I had some pens, and so I just started asking people like, "Can I draw you? And then would you do me the same? Would you draw me back?" And it was a way to like with my work, like get to know someone by actually forming a connection through drawing. And what I tend to think is, the way I see someone is, maybe my artist's eye, and a lot of the people that I asked to draw me back or that I had drawn hadn't really drawn much before. So some of the drawings are very, maybe they're just very bold, or they haven't thought about drawing really.
Right.
And so it's interesting to see.
They're instinctual.
Yeah, it's also interesting to see how the perception of me came out to a drawing. But then I also thought they're also telling a bit of their own story through how they're drawing me.
Right.
It's in a place where there was mass, I can't remember the word for it, when people like cut off.
Amputation.
Like brutal.
And this was a way of just sort of intimidating and terrorizing.
Yeah, it's a horrible.
The citizens.
I have like really hard stories from that, and
yeah.
I came back pretty traumatized out of seeing secondary trauma. So I created an exhibit at an arts, through an art residency called Escape to Create in Florida. I came back with all these thoughts and all these sketchbooks, and I started thinking, well, what if, I sewed some clothing that kind of were based around the children that I met that were orphans, and then I also took the sketches and started to make them come together. And I thought about how I like to sew. And in clothing, there's interfacings, right? There's always something that makes a structure.
Right, that you bond to it.
Right, that you take that loose fabric and you add an interfacing, which gives it structure. Right. And I thought, part of when we face each other, when we're interfacing each other, that forms a structure, that forms a relationship, that forms a connection. That's something that is in particular interesting when you're actually allowing yourself to be drawn.
It's a foundation of strength as well.
Right, and this idea of drawing together, it's like coming closer together. And in our world, like right now, where it's like apart together and there's a lot of separation, I thought it was really interesting to bring this about, and then in coordination with really loving to connect through drawing towards people and others and the work, and giving honor to both parts of that drawing relationship.
Well, I can definitely see how, the exhibit Winter Spring, which takes elements from the dictionary and the Unearthed collection, right? Mm-hmm. You're still pulling some ideas from there, and the interfacings with, the caretaking and the looking to make connection. I mean, I can see where your thinking threads all the way through, as well as this idea of sewing and binding and layering and connecting. So, there's a thought process that you maintain through the different series of work and through the years as a way of approaching your work. Yeah, that's how I see it. So I want to ask you a question. We're going to close this up. I want to ask you a question that I ask every one of my guests on the studio door. And that question is, what advice do you have for young artists or older emerging artists or artists who want to, make a break into, they have goals to succeed in the art world as an artist? What advice do you have for them?
I would say start to think about your rhythm of work. Like, how do you work? And start to find a structure for it. For me, some artists I know check in and out of their studios. They go in at 9, they stay till 5, or maybe if they have a side job, they work 2 hours a day and go to a side job, because not all art, and also understanding that it's still very difficult to make a living solely from your art practice. So there are times, understanding to give yourself grace to find your practice. For me, I practice in large swaths of time, then I have to take the time off. So I'm more of a on-off person. You know, for like this project, I was amazed when we came in and installed, and I went home I went back at 5. I thought, what's happening? How come I have this extra time?
I wasn't here till 3 a.m.
I know, right? And so, but some people, I mean, I think finding a practice, something that you do that, and being kind to yourself and knowing that that's something that how you work, but really finding out how do you work and maximizing that, right? Rolling with that. Don't, you know, if you don't, and then the time off where I'm not in the studio, I'm doing more business things that I need to do some catch up work. So I'm kind of this, but other people I know are, you know, I admire the people who are different than me.
Right.
I can learn from them, as I think, you know, vice versa. So I guess that's advice, is just really understanding how you work. And if you don't know how you work, start to think about it.
Yeah, identify it. Identify what your art practice actually needs from you, and how it functions the best.
Yeah.
And maybe even, and I've had to do this in my own art practice, is let go of things that you think are going to work that aren't working.
Right.
Like, I'm going to go in every day at this hour and do it, and then it just falls apart.
Right. And I think also being open to suggestions. Like I feel that, you know, when you're young, you think you know everything, and like I did, but I think as I've gotten older, and I think if you open up yourself to saying, you know, someone does this way better than I do, like let me listen to them, or, you know, being able to take advice from people and filtering that through your strengths. And
let the curator put the tulips on a tilt.
Right.
Right.
I mean, we worked through some things that if I were maybe younger, I would say, no, I want to do it this way. You know, I mean, I think there's a kind of a stepping back and having other step forward, and vice versa.
Well, and there were times that I threw ideas at you, and you thought about it, and you sort of stood your ground about that's how you wanted it to look, and you know, and I conceded to you on that. You know, that's part of the process, right? Is being collaborative and letting everybody be the expert in their field and contribute what they have,
right? And
to make the best out of, you know, exhibit.
Yeah, and so I hope that's good advice. I feel like, you know, there's lots of different advice, but that's one that's on my mind right now. It's this circle and cycle of work in your practice.
That's really great. Thank you so much for being here. I want to take one moment, and I know that you will appreciate this, to acknowledge our volunteers that helped us put this together.
Yeah.
I mean, this was a really different type of a project for the people who normally volunteer to do the installations. And anyone who's interested in helping volunteer to help us put up these exhibits, please give me a call. But I mean, we had such a great team, and our one buddy, Taylor Karsten, actually took her vacation days from work to come and help us. So, I mean, they did such a great job. And Jane and Marcia, I mean, we really had a great time.
I know, and I had a ton of volunteers helping me on my end back in my studio. And I mean, I honestly would probably have to say 12 or 15 different names.
We couldn't have done it without you guys.
Well,
so thank you
so
very much.
Yeah.
Leslie, thank you so much. We are so proud of this exhibit.
I'm just delighted in how everything is. And I just really encourage people to come and enjoy the light.
Well, thank you so much. And we'll see you next time on the studio door.